Alright guys, my name is Ryan. I am one half of Funk Your Mother, and today I'm going to be going over some techniques that you can apply with your reverb. If you guys are into Dave Pensado, he's a great, phenomenal. Can't even can't even describe how great he is at mixing and mastering in general. But he also has a great web series that he has videos on, and it's called Into the Lair at Pensado's place. He also has a group forum, which is great. But he went over a technique that implies reverb in one of his particular videos. I can't say which number it is because I don't really remember it. But um, the technique that he went over had to do with distortion and pitching of reverb for vocals. Now, I thought it was a very interesting technique, and I've always thought it was cool to kind of take particular effects that people come up with on certain types of tracks and kind of change them and warp them and add them to something else. Because, I mean, if you apply a certain type of effect to a completely different instrument, sometimes it'll have like a completely unique uh, feel to it, just because it's a different instrument. It's got a different tonality, um, different timbres, all kinds of stuff. So let's go ahead and get right into this. What I'm going to be going over is I'm going to be going over the reverb and how we can apply it to particular instruments to make them more exciting. Now, let's start things off pretty simple. What I'm going to be using is just this chord structure. It's nothing crazy. It's just a little silent patch. Um, all that's going on is that I've just got some decay, a little bit of sustain, a little bit of release. 8 voices, just some extra detuning, stereo spread. Um, and it's pretty much the same all around. Polyphony of 5. There's a low pass filter on each one. Um, and there's nothing really too crazy about them. You can go ahead and pause the video if you want to check out what's going on. I'm not really using it as much. It's just kind of like to just shelf off some of the extra highs that I don't need. And it kind of adds a slight characteristic of an extra punch. Mod envelopes just have something a little bit, something that resembles the actual envelopes for the amp, but just no sustain and extra release. And then the velocity I have playing with volume, just because I like my synths to have some control with velocity and volume. I'm used to that with FL. Then I just have both mixers up, and then the master pushed up. EQ, really nothing too crazy. Just a little bit of boost on the bass. Pump it to 40 hertz. Some extra treble. Around 2K. Just to add some extra grit to it. So yeah, there's nothing too crazy. And then the lead synth is pretty much the same. It's just a polyphony of 1. It's more of a mono synth. And some extra flare with some bends and a little bit of delay here and there. But the really cool thing is the reverb. I'm not applying any reverb to the original part. Now all I have going on is just a limiter for some sidechain, and then just fat filter. All I'm doing is shaving off the bottoms and shaving off some of the highs, giving a little bit of touch-ups, the 5K area, and then cleaning up the bottom region, kind of shaping the synth. So again, nothing too crazy. Now let's just go ahead and play the trigger. This is my trigger for my sidechain. You can hear that. It's nothing really insane. And then here is my synth. Now, have it being sent to this dry, and I'm sort of monoing things out. And I'm going to tell you why right now, is because I'm adding the extra reverb. All the reverb has a lot of a bigger stereo presence, and I want to kind of keep that stereo presence just because it'll add that extra depth, and it kind of sends it towards the back. Otherwise, it's going to start sounding too close and personal up towards the front, which isn't what I'm going for. with this sound, especially not with chords. So the first one for the reverb, what Dave Pensado mentions is to add some distortion or excitement before the reverb. You can also flip it around if you want to, but I wanted to keep it as close as possible to what he was originally doing. So I'm just using tube excitement just to have the extra grit of tube. I'm really pumping it on a lot of these and a little less on the mids and less on the lows just because I don't want it to get too messy. But you do want to have it just a little messy just because it'll add to the characteristic of it. Because the next thing you're going to do is you're just going to add the reverb. And all I have is just the reverb. You don't need the dry signal or the early reflection. You can choose to do it if you want to, but for how big this reverb sounds, I think the early reflection is kind of pointless, especially when you start getting into a large decay. It just gets messy, and you're not really going to hear that tone as much. I haven't changed anything on the size. Just added a dash of high to it, because normally it takes off a little bit. The high is off, and I've kind of pushed up the dampness, kind of heightened it, and again, extra decay. Then I have a limiter going on again, so I'm sidechaining the reverb afterwards, and it also adds compression, which is great. So it's kind of keeping things leveled, and it's not getting too messy whenever my sidechain with my original synth is going on, because I don't want any conflicting sounds going on, especially when I want that pumping sidechain effect. I mean, because really this technique, we're going for excitement, so we want to keep emphasizing on that. So pumping sidechain is great for excitement. Then I go through with Pro Q. I'm just shaving off the bottoms just so that it's not messy on the line, and shaving off the top ends just enough to where it kind of sits underneath the original synth, and then just shaping it between the 500 to 1K region, and then cleaning it up between the 200 to 500 region. Now let's just go ahead and listen to what that sounds like. We're going to go ahead and A-B it. I'm going to go ahead and silence our trigger just so that we're just hearing the original synth pumping, and then I'm going to add the reverb. Okay, sounds great. Now you can already tell that reverb's going to be big just from that little sustain right there, or release. And again, A and B. There's a big difference going on there. I'm not pumping the volume too crazy on the reverb. I've already tucked it and I've already measured it out in mono. That is something I would advise. And monoing out this synth helps to keep things clean. Just because if the synth is in stereo, you don't really feel the effect of a reverb as much. Things kind of get messy. So that's the main reason I kind of pushed this synth more towards mono and kept the reverb in stereo, just for some extra space. And the next sound that you go for is pitching. Now I'm just using Ghetto Bass. I got this plugin for free, I believe. I believe it is for free completely by Acme Bar Rig. It's called Ghetto Bass. Basically what it does is it just gives you some tuning and some panning for your tuning. And then you can do dry and dry panning. And then you can also change the input level. I just pushed it up just a little bit just to give some extra volume. And I pitched everything up an octave. And I kept it panned on the outsides just so that it wasn't weird and offset. It's a unique plugin, and it's great for a quick go-to whenever you want to pitch something for the original synth that you don't want to create an extra synth or bounce it as a sample. Of course, if you want to bounce it as a sample or create an extra synth, feel free to do so. There's probably more control in either one of those ways. For this demonstration, I'm not trying to get too serious. I'm just trying to show you guys the process and how I go about achieving this. The reason why I pitched it up is because I want the sound to basically hit in the higher register. So I basically want it to sound brighter. I want it to sound more lifted. Whenever you go for higher notes and a brighter sound on as far as the spectrum, it's going to sound like it's closer towards the top. It's going to sound a little bit lifted, a lot softer. It's going to make it sound a bit more, I guess, quote-unquote, airy. And next thing I do is I add reverb. There's more dampness and a little bit more high cut going on, or actually not as much high cut going on, sorry. But it's considerably brighter in terms of reverb for this one, just because I kind of want to keep the characteristics sort of the same as what originally is going on with the pitching. And then just some extra side chaining is going on before so, just because, again, I want to keep that pumping effect, because we're going for excitement. And then Pro Q, I kind of shaved off a lot of the bottoms, just because I really wanted it to sit towards the top, and I didn't shave as much off the top because I really want this synth to kind of sit on the tops, or this effect. Cleaned out the bottoms and shaped the mids. So this on its own sounds like this. Sounds a little weird, and I know, it sounds a little funny. Let's go ahead and play the original. Let's go ahead and play with the height. Now you can definitely tell when it's playing, when they're both playing together and they kind of coincide with each other, they are really teaming up, and that extra octave going up with the reverb kind of adds to the synth. It kind of adds an extra flair, makes it a little bit softer, but it still keeps that excitement going on. And it also does lift the synth. Now we add back our original reverb with the distortion in the bottom. Let's go ahead and A-B everything, and then I'm going to add them both together. Awesome. Now we can tell this is going to be a big sound, and I love this. Now that is great for any kind of instrument that you choose. Obviously, you're going to have to change the characteristics of things a little bit to fit the song and the actual sound source that you're using, but it's great for adding that extra excitement and getting creative with your reverb. I see a lot of people get really creative with their synths, with their samples, with their EQing process, compression techniques, all sorts of different things come into play where people get really creative. One of the things I don't see as much is people getting creative with their reverb. Now these are just two ways that you can get creative with your reverb and get crazy. So obviously there are plenty of different ways to go about it. Just start messing around with some things. If you see a technique specific for one particular instrument, try it out on a bunch of different instruments. Just see how it comes into play. You never know what you're going to stumble upon. If somebody has never tried to do it and they stick to one particular thing, then no one really knows what's going to happen if you try to apply it to something else. So definitely always feel free to jump out to new territory and be daring, be creative. Now I'm going to show you a quick example, just this on a lead. For the lead, I pretty much did the same thing. Everything's pretty close, just less distortion on the mids, more on the lows. Reverbs, it's reverb. You're pretty much just going to tune it to how you want to. But I kept it pretty low, and then shaved off some of the top, some of the bottom, cleaned it up, and then for this one, instead of pitching it up, I pitched it down an octave. The reason for doing so is because it's a lead. I kind of wanted to add some extra width to it and kind of add that bottom region. Whenever you add a sort of lower tone underneath a lead, instead of adding an extra tone on top, because sometimes they can get a little ear piercing, a little bit annoying, and it can cause ear fatigue, and it can get a little messy. So I went for a lower pitch just to kind of shake things up. Now here's the lead on its own. Oh, there we go. Here's our lead. Now all that's going going on in this lead is I added some delay. Delay is great for putting right before reverb because it makes for a less muddy sense of reverb, and sometimes you don't even need reverb. If you really want to tune your delay and get crazy with it, sometimes you don't need it, but for this particular instance I decided to use it. So it's here with here's our low reverb, or normal reverb on its own. Sounds really cool. Here's our lower pitch reverb, an octave down. Sounds awesome. Let's combine all those. Awesome. And then I did something similar for our bass. I have my normal reverb and then our pitched up an octave reverb. Normal reverb with our distortion, of course. Pitched up. Now, and then with effects. Awesome. And then another thing I go over, I did see a post come up earlier in this group, people talking about adding some extra copies of any kind of percussions that you have to add some extra transients. You can also use it for all kinds of different sounds. One of the things I wanted to go over is whenever you do this, a really interesting technique is you can separate that transient, and then you could add different effects to each one. So for my sustains snare, what I have going on is a little bit of delay, and it's really being perceived, the delay is coming from the, I think it's a pre-delay, and it's coming from the left side, so it hits before the actual main sound of the snare, and that main sound of the snare is just hitting close towards the center. So let's see what's going on here. Where are we? There we go. Okay, awesome. Awesome, see? Great. Alright, now I just have a limiter, just some saturation going on, different settings. This is all going to change depending on whatever sound you're doing, so I wouldn't worry too much about trying to copy any of that, for those of you that are interested in doing so. Now for the reverb, I didn't get too crazy with it. I just added a lot of brightness, a lot of dampness, kept the decay the same. And I really wanted to let the stereo field kind of play out just because this snare is already hitting towards the left side, so I didn't see it too much of a conflict of interest here. But I didn't really pump up the reverb either. And then I waited until all of my compression and reverb to do all my EQing. You've noticed I've done that several times now. Just because I feel it makes it cleaner. I don't have to keep going back over and over and over and over again to EQ things after I've added some particular effect. I know I've done it in the past, but lately for the album stuff, it's made it a lot easier to do it this way. Again, just cleaning things up and then just adding some brightness, just because that delay kind of added a little bit of phasing and it kind of shaved off some of my top end. So naturally, I wanted to add that back. And then our transient snare. Has some compression going on. Oh. Go back to that. Yeah, it was somewhere around there. Let's go play that. For the sake of the video, I'm not trying to get too crazy. So I'm not really too worried about this. I already have a saved file. Obviously, I'm not going to save this, so I can always jump back. But the important thing is I have this distortion going on just to kind of accent what's going on with my initial transient. And then I EQ'd it a little bit differently, obviously, just to kind of make it kind of stand out a little bit more. Combine those two. Take away the transient. The transient's kind of panned for pre-delay to happen on the right side as opposed to the left, just so that we can still keep that separation. But yeah, it's nothing too crazy, something subtle. You don't really want to get too gung-ho with it and pump it up to where it's super noticeable that that's going on. it's gonna be better for a more subtle effect, unless it's used in a creative purpose and you really want it to stand out and that appeals to the song. But here's everything together, and this is all just a bit of extra compression on top and some saturation going on, and then a quick little limiter. So nothing serious, but this is just to kind of show you the song all together. Okay, so that all sounds great and fine. But just for a quick reference, let's go back here. I know I'm dragging things out, but just for a quick comparison, just to see what this all did. With the reverb adding all that excitement. Let's play a more dry kind of version. Now there's still the effects on the percussions, nothing too crazy. But there's no reverb magic happening on the synths. They're just the normal synths with their EQing and their sidechain compression. Now, buffering clips aside, sounds a little boring. I think that reverb adds a lot of nice touch. I think you guys get the general idea. I don't think I have to play that again. But yeah, if you guys do enjoy the song, I will probably put this out for free. But this video is definitely here for you guys for any sort of learning purposes. Again, guys, get creative with your reverb techniques, your delays. Definitely let me know in the comments. Kind of tell me some of the crazy techniques you like to go about with your reverbs, how you like to get creative. Share it with the group. It's always great to kind of build ideas. The more we add in the melting pot, the more well-rounded we'll all be. And the better off we'll be. The way I see it, the more we all know, the better music I'll have to listen to, because we will all be professionals at that point. Right? Hopefully. Well, until next time, I'm Ryan from Funk Your Mother.